This week, and also last week, I've been working on the mobile port of the game. After not touching it for a few months, I've now started experimenting with new control schemes, fixing quality of life things, and just generally making it not be terrible. And the week before this one, I managed to finally get test flight builds integrated into my GitHub pipeline, so each commit now installs directly to my daily driver iPhone without me having to do anything, which honestly has been one of the biggest milestones for this project in quite a long time. This is a game about exploration and discovery in a large, procedurally generated, high fantasy world. You discover things, collect items, kill monsters, and go on a journey, just like the journey I've been on recently with GitHub Actions. Last week was essentially just me getting the thing to work, and I decided, because it was basically nothing but failing GitHub Actions, it wasn't really going to make a fun video, and it would make more sense to just skip it and use the time it would have taken to make the video to actually just develop the game a bit more. So I've just kind of been able to crack the game open at any point when I got a free moment and just play it for a bit and see what I think the game kind of needs and then start adding those things to a list. So as a result of that, this week has pretty much just been quality of life improvements for the mobile build, which to be honest it was sorely in need of. And I also found a solution to that bug that was causing everything to crash, which I'll tell you about in a bit. So the mobile build looked like this at the start of this week, and now it looks like this. Firstly, I did a bit of work on the zoom system. Previously, I had a pinch to zoom system which was just a bit too fiddly for my liking. I found from actually playing the game that I really kind of ended up spending a lot of time zooming around, so having to incorporate two fingers to do that just made it really fiddly and annoying. And also one of the main points of this game is that you can play the whole thing with just the thumb, so having to do that didn't really work. To solve this, I added this button which you can slide your thumb along to modify the zoom level, and I also played around with things like acceleration to make it feel more natural. In the end, I ended up extending this all the way down to the screen so you've got access to it at any point. And I also dropped the opacity so you can see what you're actually doing. I've also now completely removed the pinch to zooming, which means that things like double tapping to dash is now much faster because I don't have to wait for any of the pinch to zoom like cooldown timers. I did actually really like these changes, but I obviously plan to spruce up the user interface at some point later on, when I know that a lot of this stuff is actually going to stay in place. I've made it possible to toggle the world view by tapping the minimap. I did find myself using that quite a lot when I added it to the just regular controller scheme, so having that on mobile is really cool. And I've also added this nice little animation thing so that it actually like zooms out nicely rather than just like jumping to it immediately. I've started hiding health bars after a certain distance. That was actually something I've been meaning to do for a long time. It got really noisy when you had a lot of enemies on the screen, and you could barely even make out what you were looking at in the world. So that's just a nice quality of life thing. And I've also just started kind of redesigning the mobile interface a little bit. The original design wasn't really a design, it was just kind of like get all the stuff on the screen and make sure it works. But now I'm trying to make it actually interesting to use. So I kind of had to try and make it work properly. None of this stuff is really solid yet, but what I'm really trying to do is keep things quite minimal on the screen. So one of the first things I've done on that is I've got rid of the special move buttons. They're just gone. This is the same for desktop as well. I just kind of felt like they were a bit annoying and they took up a lot of space. And to be totally honest, I'm still not really convinced about how the combat system is actually going to work yet. So for me, I'm thinking it would be good to be able to free up that screen real estate and just get rid of them. And then when I come back to think about combat, I can just revisit that. So for now, they're hidden. So one of the things I've started doing now is I'm also using Apple's API to get the safe region for the phone. So that is not including the notch or anything like that. So stuff during gameplay is guaranteed to be positioned below where the notches are. I haven't actually got that to work on Android yet, but I will do later. The other thing I've done is I've extended the render window all the way up to fill the entire background of the screen. So previously, I just used to render it to a texture and put it in a little box on the bottom of the screen. But for things like the notches, where you're not really going to have any user interface content, it is still nice to render the whole thing all the way up. So actually, I do think that looks a lot better now. One of the most consequential things from this week is that I've decided to start rendering the actual render texture at about half resolution, and then scale it up a bit, to kind of give it a bit of a blocky look. So this is done for two reasons really. The first is that I do think it does kind of have its charm. It does look more like an aesthetic choice than anything else, because this is ultimately quite a blocky game. But the other and probably more important thing is that if you render at half resolution, you're going to save a lot of compute time. And I do mean quite a lot. And what you really want to do as well is make sure that the phone is actually rendering at less than what its full capacity is. So you want it maybe working at 50% of the CPU's capacity basically at all times, because otherwise you'll end up with thermal problems. and you really don't want that. And sadly, I've had to make some other performance concessions. So terrain face merging has been disabled, and I'm quite sad about that, and I was warned about this in the comments. So basically, there was just too many graphical glitches with it. Like, it really did have problems. Fundamentally, the topology was like sort of illegal. Like, GPUs don't expect topology to look like that. So even though it did mean like a third less faces or whatever, it also just made everything else really complicated. The graphical glitches on some devices were worse than others, and frankly, having an unknown like that, you know, like you don't know how a certain GPU is gonna deal with it. It's just not good. I've added a button to orientate the camera, so currently just tapping the screen will move the player and the camera. So I've added the ability to just move the camera, which is quite nice when you're doing things like looking around the world in the zoomed out view. It's a game about moving around the world, isn't it? I spent a while tracking down this problem that I was seeing specifically only on the iPhone SE, and I have absolutely no idea why it was doing it, but all I had to do was stick a few round functions into the shader, and then the numbers were correct. Now the problem is, in doing that, I seem to have reintroduced that problem onto my Samsung Galaxy S7, so I don't particularly know why that would be. But it's just another thing I've got to look into. It's not doing it on the Pixel phone, so. And I fixed this absolutely terrible crashing bug that was only appearing on certain iPhones. I did think this was probably related to how new the chip is, because on some chips it seemed to be really bad and just crashing all over the place, whereas in some of the other ones it just worked fine. This was actually a case of the graphics driver having like an actual panic, so it freaked out and just crashed the entire thing. So I'm fairly sure this is an issue related to Ogre 3D. You know, realistically, you're not meant to be able to do this to the graphics driver. I didn't really spend too long diagnosing it after I realized that it could be fixed by just disabling the shadows. So when you completely strip the shadows out of the game, the problem just magically solves itself, which is kind of interesting. But to be honest, I was considering doing this anyway just on mobile, because shadows are like really expensive. Like very expensive. And I've got to admit, I kind of felt like the shadows just kind of cluttered everything up a bit. I mean, when you're dealing with quite a small screen, like you don't really want too much stuff on the screen. You want to be able to quite easily read what you're doing. So I don't really think the shadows added too much there. The thing is, this is going to be such a big performance improvement on mobile that I think it's just worth it. So for you devoted followers, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how I got TestFlight to actually work. It just involved a lot of bash scripts. Basically, I just had to figure out how to like sign all this stupid stuff and like make it Apple approved and all that sort of thing. The thing is, it was just a week of just trying things until they worked and just like waiting for builds to fail after 20 minutes on the cloud and stuff like that. Like, it was slightly infuriating, but I mean, we got there in the end and it was definitely worth it. I can now just install builds of the game onto any of the iOS devices I own without having to build it through Xcode and like set up developer profile and just all that annoying stuff. Like, I don't have to do it. And also the builds won't self-destruct after 2 days like before when I didn't have a proper developer account. Now in theory, I could just start doing public betas at some point using TestFlight, and I am planning to do that, but I think my plan is that I will also have a bit of time to actually just improve stuff, because there is still some stuff that needs a bit of tweaking. There would have to be things I want to test as part of the public betas, so the plan in the early days would be just keep it small scale, so I can actually get good quality feedback and then just try and grow it over time. So next week I'm planning to just carry on with all this stuff. I think the Android build is going to be one of the ones that I'm going to focus on next week because I think it just does need some improvement. A lot of the Android phones are still struggling to hit that 60 frames a second, even with the half resolution rendering. But to be honest, I haven't properly profiled it yet, so once I do that, I can like properly figure out some of that stuff. So yeah, it's actually been a really exciting few weeks for the project, and I'm very excited about where it's all going. Sorry I didn't get a video out last week again, but it really was just a whole week of like failing GitHub actions. Like, there really just wasn't a point. So I was able to just do a bit more development, and yeah, next week I'm planning to do some development. Imagine that. So I'll see you there. Thank you. See you next time.